This is the Church of Reason. The American Meltdown. Tonight, our groundbreaking report with international freethinker, Mr. Winston Wu, spiritual leader of the Happier Abroad Forum. Good evening, Mr. Wu. Sir, in your expert opinion, what is your assessment on America's social scene?
In about the mid-1980s, America became a lot less sociable. It became less and less normal to talk to strangers or talk to your neighbors. The social and human connection started to deteriorate big time. You might remember that it was a lot easier to talk to people, to connect with people, to make friends. The social interaction was just a lot more normal. It wasn't as pretentious.
And how did you notice this, sir?
You can see from the films of that era that people were just more natural and down to earth. If you watch the movies or TV shows of the 1970s, you can see that. And if you talk to people that were around back then, they'll tell you that it was a lot easier to make friends. I mean, it wasn't complicated. It was just simple and natural.
In many countries, it is easy to talk to strangers.
Some countries, but just not America, especially not on the West Coast, like in California or the Seattle area.
Most people lack the courage to denounce this.
You gotta ask people that are free thinkers, that are not afraid to be brutally honest and upfront and just tell it like it is. You shouldn't ask people that are trying to be trendy and conform to trends or political correctness. Those type of people will never admit the truth because they only will say whatever is trendy and popular and cool.
Those people are just a waste of time.
Those aren't truth seekers and they're not that honest. Those aren't the people that I would suggest you ask about this kind of thing because they're just going to deny it. So you got to ask somebody who's very honest and blunt and loves the truth and is somewhat of a free thinker and not afraid to tell it like it is. A spade is a spade.
Now, Mr. Wu, this undesirable phenomena is not spread evenly across the states, is it?
Some places are friendlier than others where people will still make small talk with you, especially like in small towns or rural areas. Once you get out of the big city, people are more interested in making eye contact and making small talk and more relaxed. You'll notice that within America, but especially abroad, you'll notice that in most foreign countries, as long as you avoid Northeast Asia, though.
Describe Northeast Asia for our less literate audience.
Countries like Hong Kong, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Singapore.
So why do you think this is happening, sir?
The reason is because American culture has this long-standing tradition of being independent and individualistic and not needing other people. That's always been part of American tradition, and when people come to America, they come to be independent, not dependent. They don't come seeking social connection or being interconnected with other people. They're trying to be independent, to make money, to find opportunity.
It's easy to see the difference when visiting other countries.
Anyone that travels the world knows this, especially if they're super honest and aware and a truth seeker or free thinker. They'll tell you that in other countries you do have this social connection and inclusiveness that you don't get in America.
Are you suggesting that America was always like this?
What I'm saying is even when America was more inclusive than it was today, like before the early 1980s, it still was never as sociable as, say, Europe.
But when was the actual turning point, Mr. Wu?
Some people think the turning point when Americans became less sociable and open was maybe 1990, or some even say 1995. People don't all have the same opinion about when this big transition occurred, but I would say it's around the range of between 1985 and 1990.
What were the first symptoms you detected?
America just became a lot more isolating, and people became more picky about who they made friends with, became more competitive, and just wasn't down to earth.
And you believe the movies depict this behavior?
You can see this in the movies of the 1980s. If you watch those high school dramas like Pretty in Pink with Molly Ringwald or 16 Candles, you'll see that the teenagers in those movies acted very shallow and pretentious. They weren't down to earth, so they were much harder to get along with. People who are shallow and pretentious, if you're not cool enough, they don't want to talk to you. They look down on you.
This is not very friendly behavior.
To me, that's just not friendly. In real life, high school was like that. But the thing is, if you watch the movies of the 1970s, you don't see that. You don't have these teenage dramas where people act very pretentious. They acted a lot more natural. They didn't act insecure. But all of a sudden in the 80s, people started acting more insecure. If you grew up at that time, you sort of know what I'm talking about.
So what did you observe during the 80s?
In the 80s, everyone was very insecure about themselves. They constantly had to brag and act tough and flaunt a big ego in order to try to overcompensate for that. Whereas in the 70s, you didn't have to do that. People just liked you for you. And if you were creative or eccentric, then you were considered cool.
What about nerds?
Even if you were a nerd, you were considered cool. There wasn't a negative stigma toward being nerdy or watching Star Trek. That negative stigma about being a nerd or a geek really started in the 1980s, along with the pretentiousness, the shallowness, and the insecurity that nobody likes you for you, so you've got to try to act tough and have a big ego.
Describe this tough talk, sir.
At some point, if you grew up in America, you will have heard someone give you this tough talk speech like, this is a cold, cruel world. Nobody's going to take care of you except you. You've got to rely on yourself. No one cares about you. You're all you've got. You've got to rely on yourself because no one's going to take care of you. Especially if you grew up in New York or California, you're going to hear that kind of tough talk.
Is this common to see in other countries?
That kind of talk is not common in other countries. You don't usually hear that. That's really an American thing.
Though America usually sets the example to follow.
Don't buy into this fallacy that everything that you hear in America applies to the whole world. That's a very big fallacy that everyone makes in America. They think whatever problem you have or challenge or obstacle is the same as the whole world because America equals the world. And that is just not true. If you grew up in a different country, you'll know what I mean. You don't get that type of tough talk because in other countries, people have real friends and they can depend on each other.
And what about this new age movement? It sounds quite absurd.
In America, you also have this concept where, oh, you gotta love yourself because, yeah, it's like no one's gonna really love you, so you gotta love yourself first.
Masturbation? That's total nonsense.
It doesn't make any sense because to love someone, there has to be a second person. You can't just love yourself. That's like trying to kiss yourself. The Eastern spirituality teacher, Alan Watts, even said that. He's one of the few people that agree with me. You can't love yourself because it's like trying to kiss yourself. There has to be another person.
Sounds depressing, actually.
Everyone that's grown up in America, especially in a big city, has heard all that tough talk.
When we come back, the origins of the meltdown of American society. Stick with us. Don't nobody go nowhere. You are listening to The Church of Reason.